Good, welcome. We were just stating our names and where we live.
Oh, my name is Lynn Chaparro, and I'm a personal friend of Edwin and Jean's, and I live in Gloucester.
Welcome.
Thanks.
Okay. Now, Jean tells me that in her DNA test, she comes up 2% Finn. So, of course, as far as we're concerned, she's 100% Finn. I just have two items before we move on to the program. On October 22nd from 6 to 8 at City Hall is an evening of Finnish American dancing. Cape Ann Finns is a co-sponsor along with Gloucester Cultural Initiative, and Finlandia Foundation gave a very generous grant money to enable this event coming up. Valerie, would you like to say anything more about it?
Well, we hope you all come. It should be a grand dance evening. Leila Luopa and Ivanilo Christine Anderson are going to be playing and teaching dances, so there'll be for sure the schottische and the polka and the waltz. And the goal is to have everyone join in, even if you sit in a chair and move your arms around that. Leila teaches that too. So there'll be children dancing. There's a class in the afternoon, so it's an evocation. Rob and I have done quite a bit of research again. You know, we've looked at music before, and we've looked at theater, and now we looked at dance. And John and Betty Ercola uncovered stuff, Susie Daddy had stories, and basically this incredibly rich heritage out here in the halls of dances almost every week. They typically followed a concert or even a basketball game, you know, or a play, so some kind of program followed by a dance, and they were rip-roaring, and we're trying to recreate that energy, and I think everyone who can come will really enjoy it, and we're hoping a lot of groups in Gloucester will show. The Finns had welcomed everyone out in these neighborhoods, Italians and Irish, and not just the Finns. So it was a multi-generational, multi-ethnic event, and we're trying to recreate that.
Is there anything that you're looking for to prepare for the event?
Oh, well, we will have a table out, and we found a few costumes that people have, and I have some old records, and we have a few photos. But if you have anything in your attics, or you recall that's by way of a program at one of the halls that would have mentioned a dance, or any costumes, or anything else, photos of dances, you know, please. And then there will be some interviews that night too. If you have some stories, you can come and go on camera, and we'll record those. So we hope you're all there. 6 o'clock at City Hall.
Thank you.
And one more thing.
Oh, I'm ready to
We've made a big deal out of the treats we're having. They're from Cape Ann, but she makes cardamom buns. So, and then she's going to do a blueberry tart for us and Swedish princess cakes. So even the food is cupcakes. So the food is, it's all in all a really fun and recreation of the old days of the Finn Hall dances. So,
What's the date again?
next Saturday, the 22nd, 6 o'clock at City Hall. Thank you.
Yeah. City Hall is also accessible. There is an elevator, although most of us probably don't know that. And we think of those ugly steps, or the granite steps, and the number of them trying to get into the auditorium. But there is an elevator. You go in on the Dale Avenue side. So the next item before we begin is...
Can I just say one more thing? Is that this is really a bit of a launch for Gloucester 400 Plus. They have lent their full support to this as well, and it's a first kind of showcase of the history of the ethnic cultures. So here's the Finns and Lanesville and Rockport showing up early and with a great dance program. So we're really proud to have this happening.
Thank you. The other piece of information that's all on the front page of your agenda is that FinFun 2022 is October 27th to the 29th this year at the Inn at Heastill Farm in Troy, New Hampshire. If anyone has not been to all of it or a part of it, it might be worth, especially if it's a day like today, taking a trip to Troy, New Hampshire. And people, there are day rates. And if you come at noontime and attend the sessions in the afternoon time, I think that's about $50, including lunch. So you might want to consider that. And of course, finfun.org is the place to go for more information. We've
next year, Rob. Next year here.
Oh yeah, next year here. We'll talk about that in the agenda. We want to move on to our program, and the program. Thank goodness we all know how to modify and adjust, because our original people, for some reason or other, ill health or the not, worried about being part of a larger group yet with the COVID, and having had it, understandably they backed off. But thankfully, we have our stalwarts here. We have Edwin Erickson, most of his life in Lanesville. We have Fred Peterson, and he told you the various places that he has lived. And they're not new faces to us, and we know that every time they do make a presentation, we are all the better for it. So we are modifying and adjusting the topic a little bit under the circumstances. So the first thing we'll do is we'll start off with Edwin talking about the St. Paul Lutheran Church in Lanesville. Edwin?
I think we applaud everybody.
Yeah.
Yeah. I don't think I need that.
Well,
Well,
just leave it
that's
there.
all right. I'm not at my best today. I have brain fog or vertigo, and my head kind of spins, and I can't hear well. But I will start. There'll be pauses till I recollect my senses. But the first St. Paul Lutheran Church was built on Nossman Avenue in Lanesville on April 3rd, 1893, by a small group of Finnish immigrants. That's what I read. What I remember, at that time, during the church services, women sat on one side of the aisle and men sat on the other side of the aisle. I also kind of remember when they had a summer fair. It was held on Langsford Street between Coggeshall Road and the cemetery. Was quite an open area. Then they had fairs at St. Plum Cove Field. That's that part. I started Sunday school in 1932. One of my first teachers was Billy Natty. My other teacher, Mrs. Ronca, who I believe was the Pastor Ronca's wife, she lived in Folly Cove. She would walk up from Folly Cove to that small church in Lanesville, and on the cold days we would walk down to her apartment in Folly Cove. I do remember during our Christmas that it was held at the Wainola Hall. We were given a piece to recite, and then afterwards Edwin Nicola, George Philfelt, and myself put on a short play in Finnish. Everything was in Finn at that time. Then when the Universalist Church, located on the corner of Morgan Avenue and Washington Street, opposite Muncie Lane and across from the Lane School, it was purchased and it became the Lutheran Church. I don't recall the Universalist Church. I read that or heard about that, but I remember it was a socialist hall. Then Pastor Kusister was the minister at the Lutheran Church where I was communed. After that, I spent time with the choir a few years, went into the service for a couple of years, came back, joined the choir, and then we formed a men's club. There were 26 members in the club, and we started the bowling league. We had 4 teams. We bowled in Riverdale, which is now a little restaurant and sort of a store that's cluttered with all kinds of stuff. The other part of the lanes is a glass place now, and the other part is a post office. From there, where shall I go? That's
Just combine chorus.
I'm gonna keep going now. As soon as I get my thoughts worked out, just finish that. Oh, then we started a softball league. There were 4 teams. One was a Lutheran Church team. The other was a team from Lanesville, another team, and a combined team from Bayview and Riverdale. And the other one was the Eastern Pointers from East Gloucester. Our games were played in East Gloucester and Plum Cove. Then where do we go? I can't get my thoughts today. We had the things that
We just started singing in the choir.
Oh yes, now I remember. In 1954, the Luther Chorus was formed. It was 4 churches, one from Worcester, the Quincy Lutheran, Maynard Lutheran, and our Lutheran church. We had our rehearsals in Maynard. Then in April 1954, we held 4 concerts. The first in Worcester, then the Maynard, and the Quincy, in our church in Lanesville, but it was held at the Congregational Church. They had more room for the 37 singers. Little pause. Oh yeah. Of the 37 singers, 9 were from the St. Paul Lutheran Church. Laurie Seppola, Raymond Seppola, Arnold Niemi, Donald Niemi, Fred Clamola, Einar Olsen, Laurie Kaimanen, Toivo Savinen, and myself. Was that 9? Okay. Close enough? Well, that about ends my talk. But there is one thing I might mention yet. It was during a choir rehearsal with Ted and I as tenors, and we had this one anthem we had to sing. but it was not the anthems as much as it was the few tricky notes that we were trying to get. So we started singing that anthem, and when we came to those notes, we burst out laughing. We could not stop. Priscilla wanted to go on with the anthem. We tried and we got worse. We couldn't stop, no way. So finally, we were in a laughing fit. So they decided we'll try another anthem. We still were laughing. But we finally were able to control ourselves. And that was the end of the laughing fit. You know, a laughing fit is a lot like hiccups. Have any of you ever had a laughing fit? They're hard to control. How about hiccups? Everybody seems to have hiccups. Did they last long? All of them? Or were some short? Well, if they were long, you really had hiccups. Otherwise, you only had the hic. That's the end of my talk. I can't remember much anymore. But I will now give you Fred Peterson.
I have a question, Fred.
Yes.
When you were a child and you were taking your Sunday school classes, were they in Finnish?
I can't hear a word.
Were your Sunday school classes in Finnish?
Yes.
Were your Sunday school classes in Finnish?
Oh, Sunday school was always in Finnish. Everything was in Finnish.
The church services too?
Oh, I might mention, yes, but we had Sunday school. We were pastor at that time was Pastor Kuusisto. He was also the Rockport Lutheran Church pastor. But then they wanted an English, there was more English people coming in speaking English, so they wanted an English-speaking pastor. Well, Kuusisto tried his best, but it was not enough for them. They wanted more. So we got another minister, and when Kuusisto left, Pastor Kennedy, Pastor Tormala came, and he was a very good pastor.
Very nice.
Yeah.
Real gentleman.
So
There was.
then everything was in, but when during my time everything was in Finnish. So
Take it away, Fred.
I was going to continue then a little bit of Ed's story, but my version. He continued to sing, and quite well. In fact, how many years, Eddie, did we sing in the choir together as tenors?
oh, I can't remember this long.
Quite a few.
Quite a long time, yeah.
He was the pure tenor.
Yeah.
I was the tenor under duress. Those F's and the G's up there and were a struggle for me, but Eddie carried me. Okay, I'm going to start out. I feel like it, back in elementary school, show and tell.
Yeah.
I brought a lot of things because, unfortunately, Joanne will tell you, I don't throw anything away. It's that Finn habit.
Yeah.
But here, I'll start with this because I did this a few years back for our church in honor of the Reformation period. And so we were drawing lots as to which century you would get. And so I got the 19th century, the 1800s. And so people were looking up, headed toward the history of religion or various types of religions in different countries and all of that. So I figured I'm going to stay on the, I want to stay on the island. I'm not going beyond anywhere. So I came up with the idea of having grown up in the Cove and then being back here now, just doing a little history of the churches here on Cape Ann, the Finnish and Swedish Lutheran churches. So I limited it, obviously. But here I did some research on these. This will be up here so you can check it out when we're through. But here is a list of the various synods and what happened with them, and the years on the margin here. So I'll start right beside those. This is St. Paul, Old and New, here on Washington Street, Northern Avenue, and then Washington Street. Below that is the Swedish Lutheran Church, which is 111 Granite Street. That's down near the garage, the Burbank and who's the other fellow?
It used to be the Granite.
Yeah, the Granite Garage, yeah.
Yeah.
But Burbank runs it now. And of course, this one is the Brown Church, the Finnish church on Granite Street, just not quite opposite the firehouse there, but it's a private home. And that's the one I did attend in the late 30s and very early 40s for some Sunday school there. And here is a stamp on there that I'll talk more about that later. I just want to move along with these. This is the old, we're presently now the Pigeon Cove Chapel, but it is still there on 145 Granite Street. It was, it became basically a Baptist young, in fact, I played basketball for the boys group in that Baptist church and went to Sunday school in the church next door, the Finnish church. Then, of course, this is Forest Street. This building was, of course, now you've added to this, the actual picture. I didn't have a picture of the church, but I had a picture of the building that remains there. So that's been added, thank you. That's the one on Forest Street. And then this little one tucked here was a Swedish Lutheran church on Pigeon Hill Court. And that closed up, I think, in the 30s or somewhere around there. And the only time it was used after it had been closed for a long period of time is Lily Dean married Edith Johnson in that church. So they had to open it up and renovate it a little bit and so forth. But that's where the Edith Dean, Lily Dean wedding was held, in that church. But in late 40s, I was living on Oakland Avenue in Pigeon Cove then. In the late 40s, Victor Conagari bought it. He was working at Merchant Box in Gloucester. And Victor Conagari bought the church, and they moved it onto Stockholm Avenue. And as a youngster playing ball in the streets and so forth, we watched the big trailer, after they jacked it up and put the trailer underneath it, taking it over to Stockholm Avenue to unload it, and they had to have the long poles to get the phone wires, electric wires out of the way. But as a youngster, I witnessed that church being moved onto Stockholm. And then this is the, in fact, that's the home there, 22 Stockholm Ave of the Conagari house. And this one I just tucked on there from memory. My dad is sitting in the top there, and Charlie Fields, old Charlie Fields at the bottom, and I won't bother giving my glass of taking the time, but you can check out the women. My cousin Phyllis Wickie, living here on that divide of Washington and Langsford. That's the old Wickie general store gas station. But we were first cousins and lived in the old homestead on the Hillside Road for many years, actually. But I just going through where are they? Your book, your picture book. This is what I clipped that out of that, or I didn't clip it out. I mean, I took a photograph of it. The book is still intact.
Save the book. Save the book.
Yeah, I did. I saved the book, but I just tucked that on there for some of the old timers. But here is some of the other Protestant churches that were in this area. So that's what I did do a few years back for my project on that. Now I'll start with that Forest Street Church because we'll work from there this way.
Sure.
And one of the things that I never really attended the church, except I think as a child we went over there for some functions or some meetings or whatever. But as far as the service is concerned, I never attended an actual Sunday service there. But my folks, my dad, this would be in the. In fact, what I'm going to read here took place between 1920 and 23. And I did a lot of research a while back for the helping in the write some of the history of the Rockport Golf Club. So I spent a lot of time in the Sawyer Library going through the tapes in there. And so I keep my eye open for various things. And fortunately, I happened to hit this one. Attended conference at Fitchburg. The Christian Endeavor of the Finnish Lutheran Church, Forest Street, attended the conference of the Eastern District held at Fitchburg, Saturday and Sunday. Instead of going by railroad, they chartered one of the Gloucester buses. The ride afforded much enjoyment through the beautiful section of the state, affording an excellent opportunity to view varied scenes. The party left here at 7:15 a.m., arrived in Fitchburg at 11:30. After enjoying the largely attended convention, they left Fitchburg Sunday afternoon at 5 o'clock and arrived home at 9:30, coming by way of Revere Beach. That's why they had a good time, which added much to their pleasure. But here some of these names might hopefully will be familiar with some of you. I know one will, particularly for people from Rockport. Those who went were Mrs. Anna Wick, Elizabeth Hendrickson, Fanny Hendrickson, Ella Johnson, Martha Tanson, Anna Peterson, my aunt, Mary Mackey, Helmi Hakkala, or Hakkala, I'm not sure of the pronunciation, Helen Toppin, Limpy Misatello, Hilda Sandberg, Alfie Peterson, my uncle, Carl Peterson, my dad, John Niemi, old Bex Niemi, Toivo Niemi, and the one any Rockport will remember, Jacob Perkio. Alfred Ranta, Iva Wick, Arvid Ranta, Victor Oinonen, and Nesta Lahtinen. Now also, you'll enjoy this probably, there is a picture of the bus. And even on top of that, the driver was my dad. Because he started, well, he was on the electric cars around the Cape in 1918. He started there. They went out in 20. So then he, right away, got a job with the Gloucester Auto Bus Company. And I kept kidding him, saying, well, no wonder they hired you. You knew the route. But he then, so he drove the bus out there and back because he had been driving for them. So that is germane to the Forest Street Church. Now also, and all these will be up here so you can peruse afterwards and while we have our meeting here. And I don't know what happened to because it was with that. And there was a little bit left on the second page, but you can read through this. But this is Beck Niemi's wife, Mrs. W. John Niemi, and it gives a little history of that Forest Street Church. So that'll be out here as well. Now let's move not next door, but around the corner and head opposite the firehouse, and we'll get to. Oh, by the way, I always have to show this one. That's the family, and if it wasn't for Uncle Axel, who was wearing the clerical collar, I wouldn't be standing here talking with him. Because he's the one in 1923 who talked my father, who was driving the buses around the Cape, into driving him to Red Lodge, Montana, where actually Uncle Axel was home on vacation. He had been out there since 1920 in this little town, mining town in Red Lodge, Montana. And so he came here on vacation by train, obviously. So he talked Dad into driving him back to Montana in a 1917 Model T. And I got too many stories, I know I've been told many times. So, but anyway, that's the only reason I'm standing here talking. Well, so we moved to the Brown Church, to the finished church, and these are pictures of the church, or a picture. This is a blow-up of the what's out in front, and then here again they're having a sale, and you've got the old finished rag rugs here being displayed in the limbs of this tree. But that's the Brown Church, where I did attend Sunday school for a few years there. And also here, and this is being donated, well actually my Aunt Anna got this before when they closed the church or whatever, but saved it, got a hold of it and brought it to the house. My cousin Phyllis has had it for many, many years. And when she heard about all what we're doing here, she gave it to me, brought it to me right away. He said, take this, and this will now be property of the
Right.
Cape Ann Finns.
And Fred, is that the stamp for the Rockport St. Paul's?
No,
Oh, for...
this is for the finished church, the brown one that I'm talking about
great.
now. Yeah,
Okay.
yeah. So this again now will be property of the Cape Ann Finns. And here's what's on that seal. The Finnish Evangelical Lutheran National Church, Pigeon Cove, Mass. On that? No, a lot of it's abbreviated. But you can read it if your glasses are good and strong enough on this. But there again, that's a result of having this. And also will be here simply articles that I put together this one is Massachusetts Finns celebrate Johannes at a festival in Lanesville, June 29-30, but 1935. So that's a few years ago. And this one is, I thought this is kind of interesting, and it's by the author of this book, Aina Rahanen. And she did a little paper on the meaning of sisu. So you might find some interesting things in that. I've always simply defined sisu as to someone who has sisu, no task is impossible. So that's my version. And here is Roy Hellander translated this for the CAF, and it's all about the Temperance League. So here again, and I don't know, I'm not tech savvy, but if you want copies, can you take your camera and take a photograph of the page if you want to save one? I don't know if that's possible, but you're welcome to do it. And lastly, there is a pack here of old marriage customs in Finland. You'll find these interesting, believe me. And finally, I have a quote, not a quote, but a quote from her book. And this I chuckle at. In an atmosphere of such permissiveness, it may sometimes be difficult for a pastor to convince his flock of the need for church going. A case in point was an old fellow known as Uncle Pekka. Pekka is Peter in Finnish. A far from sterling character who was derelict in many other things besides his church attendance. In the company of farmers, thankfully remarking on the good harvest weather, Uncle Pekka startled everyone by claiming the credit. The fine weather had come, he said, because he had prayed for it. The pastor was amused that such a one as Uncle Pekka should lay claim to influence with the Almighty. Did you say we have the good weather because you prayed for it? Uncle Pekka averred that this was so. Why do you think you should get what you pray for I don't expect to get everything I pray for, said the pastor. Well, explained Uncle Pekka modestly, I don't bother him all the time. Now that's Finn humor.
One thing I left out, I did mention that when Pastor Cousista left, Arnold Neary, because there were still elderly Finns in the congregation, Arnold Neary gave the sermon in Finnish.
Wow.
Another thing that was held at the church was a pie social, where it was musical chairs. There'd be so many chairs, and this was for the children of the church. The women made a lot of pies, and you would have so many chairs and so many to walk around as they played the piano, and it'd stop. But there'd be, say, 7 walkers, but there'd only be 6 chairs. Somebody left out without a chair. So they're out until you count to the last 2, and they'd walk around and the music would play, then it'd stop all of a sudden. Who grabbed the chair would win it, and they'd win a pie. And that went on for the afternoon, but there was a lot of pies.
I do have one addendum also. My father, Carl Peterson, and Arnie Ronka, they conducted services, maybe once a month, or during the winter months. This was back in the early 70s. They would conduct in Sunday afternoon a service completely in Finnish. My dad would do the liturgy, and Arnie would write a brief sermon for it. But that was totally a Finnish service. They did that for a number of years then. I remember once in a while too.
And another thing,
Get us going.
this was just a Sunday afternoon social where we took the names of people with their birthdays. Say those in January or in February, you take the first 6. If there was not enough birthdays in January, go into February. But you had the 6, and they would put on the coffee social, bring the pastry and the coffee. And it was just for a social get-together. That was helpful. One year, I think.
Could I add something?
Sure.
Now it's open to everybody.
Sorry.
No, it's open chair, go.
Yeah, no, I jumped ahead. I didn't know, well, because both my parents and all my grandparents were very active in the church. And recently I found this is from 1978, March. It's the newsletter that used to be mailed out to us. I think Laurie Seppel might have done this, but I'm not sure. But my mother passed away January 27th in 1978 at age 59. So this is a lovely tribute, because my mother was the organist at the St. Paul Lutheran Church in Lanesville for 29 years. So this is a lovely tribute. I'm just going to read it. It's very brief.
Sure.
It says, services were held January 30th. We were all saddened to learn of her passing. She was so much a part of our life here at St. Paul, having served with devotion for many years in all phases of our work in His kingdom. Not the least of these was her faithful service as organist for 29 years, covering a period when services were bilingual. Did it ever occur to those of us who took it for granted, being conversant in 2 languages, how valuable were her talents in this respect? One could go on praising Elsie and all that she did, but truly it can be said of her, well done, good and faithful servant.
I don't know if it was mentioned or not, and I don't hear too good, is the Lane School. I was the last graduating class there, but when that school was demolished, the church bought it from the city for $1, as long as half was put as a playground and the other as a parking lot.
Oh, that sounds like
And then I have one other thing also. That's
Take it away.
okay. This is brief also. I have, when they were cleaning out some old records at the church and they were giving them to Jim Kirty, I think, to take out to Hancock, Michigan. And we could take things if we wanted them. So I actually have, they're from 1936 to 1946. There are record books of the contributions that people made at that time. And it looks like, I don't know if they did pledging or if it was dues, but it looked like it was $3 a year through that time period. And it has all these wonderful Finnish names because everybody's name is in there. And just among some of the people, because I have been a bookkeeper, accountant for years, and it's just so strange to me because among the people in this book that did financial work was my paternal grandfather, Eric Natty, Matilda Natty, my father, Laurie Natty, and my husband, Bob, whose mother, his maternal grandparents, John Savioya and Maria Savioya. And there's Arvid Koski, and all these people that I've known through the years, and it's anyway, I find that very interesting also.
yes.
One thing I would trade on what Edwin said about the pie social. How many of you remember the
Oh,
pie social?
I used to love the pie socials.
Yeah. So,
Because I have a week.
I used to
yeah. So anyway, I went to one of them in the, downstairs. They call it the Undercroft now, downstairs.
Yeah.
And the chalk, it was wooden floor then, I think. And they chalked made them with numbers and such, and that's how you'd march around. And I might have been 8 or 9. And of course there were all these pies and cakes, just drooling looking at them. And I really was not a winner in that circle, literally and figuratively. So what happened was I finally won. And what did I win? A mincemeat pie.
I do like it.
Not the favorite, I've heard But that was the kinds of social activities that kept the church going and people gathering for not only worship but also, as Edwin pointed out, and Fred too, lots of different kinds of activities that knit the Finnish community.
Robert?
Yes.
I also remember the Christmas parties that we used to have. All the Sunday school kids would have a Christmas party, and of course the adults made it possible. But Santa came, and everybody got a gift, and we all got those hard candies, I can't explain it, but you probably know if you're my age what they are. But the gifts that they gave were cute little things, except that I, every single year, got, what is it now? I forgot it. Tiddly Pops or something like that. It was, I got the same thing every single year.
They were lollipops?
No, Tiddlywinks.
Tiddlywinks.
Oh, Tiddlywinks. Yes. Donna and Nancy or anyone, do you remember what it Oh, really? The Hawks player who, wintered here. Yeah, we lived here, I think, for a while.
Yeah, they did.
You were probably so happy with the first ones you got.
Oh, the first one's
So we're
great.
gonna do it again, you
Oh,
know?
then, it started to get boring.
And when you think about it, the churches, the Finn churches, if there was a task to be done, it was the parishioners. If it was outside work and building work, the men would gather on a Saturday and get the work done. And similarly, the women of the church, if there was a feed or something, the women would get that feed going. Unlike what we have today, is that we typically outsourced to a third party for an event or an activity. Yeah.
Oh, I'm thinking I was very lucky because I never won. And so I'm luckier than you.
There you go.
Because I didn't get him in sneak by.
It was really something.
It's just a way to look at it.
Yeah, right?
Yeah, I wanted to add something as a side note about Finnish churches. The Sacred Heart Church, of course, wasn't Finnish, and it wasn't Lutheran, it was Catholic. But many of the Christians there were actually Finnish. And as a matter of fact, and I have read this, but then my mother also told me that when my father moved back to Lanesville with my mother, who was Catholic, she said that there was a divide, a strong divide between the Lutherans and the Catholics. But it's really interesting because I once had access to a list of baptisms in the Sacred Heart Church, which I wanted to do more research on, but that more than a third of the baptisms for a certain period of time in the 1940s and 50s, a third of them were Finnish. Because the Catholic, if the Catholic, the wife was, if she was Catholic, my father had to actually ascertain that the children would be brought up Catholic. Even though my father did not convert, but he had to sign that the children would be brought up as Catholic.
Although it's not a reason to have a social gathering, I'm wondering if when that time came to decide, make a decision about the Finnish language or the English language in church, it's not a social activity, but certainly gossip and taking sides is in a way. Edwin and Fred, do you remember anything, was this transition from Finnish to English, was that an easy transition, or did people take sides in I want it Finnish or I want it English?
I think we should drop that issue.
Thank you for your response. The one thing that Sandra Stefala told me is that her dad, Charles Savinen, was a very active member of St. Paul here, Lutheran Church here in Lanesville, and that he was part of the discussion about moving towards English. And I guess at that at the committee meeting, he said simply, if we don't move to English, you know, the church is going to die. Okay? And so some lady who wanted Finnish got up and hit him with the pocket.
I just wanted to add one other thing about the Sacred Heart Church. When they actually, because in the beginning they just had a priest who would come to the church, but then they had a rectory, of course. And my father told me that there was a long-time woman who took care of the rectory for the priests that were there, and she was Finnish. I only remember he told me her name was Bridget, but maybe somebody here knows who the first housekeeper was, but she was Finnish. So again, another connection to the church.
Jean.
Well, I just have it on private information that Edwin said he did not want to discuss that situation because it got quite nasty.
There you go.
And he knows he was in the middle of it.
How many of you were in church when Kuusisto was the pastor and when Pastor Tormala became our pastor?
For
Anybody?
Oh, Pastor Trumbull.
not Lucisto.
Not Goose's.
Not Goosestow, though.
No.
Pastor Wilbur Tormala.
Yeah, but it wasn't Goose's before him, was it?
Right, yes.
Yes.
It was.
Mhm.
Oh,
So-
no kidding.
Yeah.
So we must have been.
We must have been.
We had to have been then.
Yeah.
But by the time we were going in the 50s, there was, 9:30 service was finished, and maybe in those days it might have been 11 o'clock for the English service. That
11.
Issue had been solved.
Oh, that was nice.
And, another thing that Sandra said was, and this is not, wasn't uncommon is that because the St. Paul Lutheran used just Finnish, but yet Sandra she heard Finnish at home, but she was an English speaker. So her parents, who were really important members of the Lutheran Church, let her go to the Congregational Church where everything was in English until she was 14 years old. And at that point she had to return to the Lutheran Church and take her communion there. And by that time, as Edwin pointed out, Bertie, Niemi and such, there was more English being introduced. And then in the 50s, Pastor Tormala came, and that was, and so then that was solved in terms of, well, it'd be English or Finnish. Anyone else have an observation? Valerie?
So just to follow up on the word division, I'd never heard that Finns went to the Catholic Church yet. So that's,
Yeah.
But even the story of the handbag, we apparently have a fine art of disagreeing violently with each other out here. So I picked up a few things. Well, my own Finnish background was more on the labor side of things, and my mother, who started to go with a friend to church, this uncle of her told her mother that she was not allowed to go to church. That's one of these big divides that they came over here, the socialist halls and the churches, many times not speaking to each other, and division. But we've learned some interesting things, like from Sergio, that the socialist halls, they had all the dances and they had the bands and all that, and everyone agrees that the kids of the church members, this evangelical kind of thou shalt not dance, thou shalt not drink, thou shalt not, play cards, thou shalt not enjoy oneself, that the kids would actually sneak over into the concerts and the dances, and that this was a place where the later generations tended to mix more and cross those divides. But I also wanted to add that, the interesting question of Lutheranism, you mentioned, Fred, you might have looked into all of this at the church, is to remember that all these immigrants came over from Finland, mostly at a time when there was this church state of Lutheranism, and children were required to go through second grade of schooling to be part of the church system. So the story is that when they came as adults even and into the country, like in Ellis Island, they were quite literate because of that schooling, because of the Lutheran tradition.
They had to.
They had to, right. And I have read that the Finnish immigrants are considered pretty much the most literate of immigrant groups that came into
They
this
couldn't
country.
get into the church unless they.
Yeah, right.
What years are you talking about?
Well, before World War I, a lot of that time period,
Okay,
when the church was.
And the immigration laws had become very draconian because of eugenics? In other words,
No, that did not happen
Northern
yet.
Europeans were the ones that, like Trump said, we want Norwegians. Right?
Yeah, I read.
So it was right before that.
It was
Okay.
before all
Okay.
of that when they came in. But this other history of the division then of, just picking up a few things I've been reading, is in Finland. There started to be a resentment at the church because it took property and, sort of a lot of the same problems of the Catholic Church over here. So you had Finns coming here, some who had this sort of innate distrust of the church, and then you had the churchgoers. But during the time of the unions out here and around the country, when there were Finnish immigrants fighting for their rights, church members were not helping them. And the question was, why, we're all for the same thing of equality and the rights of people and all of that, but the church members would not support that kind of political activism. So I'll just say one more thing, that turns out that my brother ended, before he died, spending a lot of time in Finland with linguists, and wrote a book Lutheranism and the Nordic Spirit of Social Democracy. And there's quite a bit of academic research over in Finland now that the Lutheran faith was such a, and continues to be, such a strong foundation for Finland and the seeds of the Nordic socialism, that the Finnish culture has an unusual amount of caring for each other. You know, looking at community orientation. I think Pastor LaDonna arrived and said, where did this come from? These church members are so full of empathy and caring for each other, and this is unusual. And in many ways, I think that's kind of coming out of the Finnish Lutheran heritage. One other thing my brother wrote was Lutheranism and the equality of women in the Nordic countries. And that part of Lutheranism, which was so different from Calvinism, was that it really had an equality of the sexes in the religion itself. And so you see over in Finland, where the parliament is so heavily Finnish, and even the current prime minister or president, whatever title, she's a fairly young woman who likes to dance, by the way, if any of you have been following that kind of controversy over there. But I do think that we've heard a lot of stories here in Lanesville, too, that the men were working in the quarries, but the women ran the farms at home and sold the milk. Didn't we find this out? Yeah, is that women were very enterprising, and I think the leadership of a lot of things around this community. So it's sort of a Lutheranism, the church. You might have some things to say for it. Lutheranism, what that religion was, it was quite distinct from Calvinism and Catholicism, and it brought in a culture of empathy and caring and orientation to the whole community. The stories of orphan kids taken in, or I think this neighborhood is replete with that kind of founded in the religion and gender equality that the immigrants brought over here. And one of the scholars who came from Finland, who came to my brother's funeral, said that it didn't almost matter whether you were in the church or in the labor movement, that early church schooling and the culture embedded that community orientation and looking out for each other, and that is so uniquely Nordic and Finnish. And he gave us an example that even to this day, if you sign up for the military, the oath you take, whether you're a church member or a non-church member, is so similar. It's the Finnish culture of duty to your community and to the country. And it's a unique, a quite thing. So all of this about the splits we had, the arguments we had, not speaking to each other, other stories that some people have heard about, reporting to the authorities about others or whatever, that still at its core, the Finnish culture is of caring, equality, human rights, and that comes out of the Lutheran religion that the Finns brought over here. And I do believe you still see it out here in this really unique neighborhood.
I think Fred wants to add something to what you're saying.
This almost summarizes what you're saying. It's out of her book, and it's on the Flame of Faith, which is the chapter about religion in Finland and the bloody religious upheavals of the Reformation had no counterpart in Finland. Either the Finns were too law-abiding to do anything other than accept what was decreed, or else the new religion appealed to them. Certainly they must have approved of abolishing the secular power of the church, since they never took kindly to interference. In any case, the Finns themselves carried out the Reformation within their borders, and there wasn't much reforming involved.
One thing that I remember is that when we talk about the reasons for the Finns that came here, maybe elsewhere, but I know here, is that the Lutheran Church in Finland was really heavy-handed and a powerful entity, and of course taxed. And so people didn't like that. And so that was a motivation for some, among other reasons, to come to the to emigrate to the United States, to get away from that, the power of the church. And to this day, Finns are taxed by the church, and that church tax is embedded in their, yearly statement or whatever it is they owe. But of course, in the modern days, we all find a way to game the system. So the Finns may go to church, but they just don't become members. Because if you're a member of a church, then you pay the tax. Or you just become, not religious, just to avoid that tax. Anyone else have a comment?
I'd like to say one thing. My name is Robert Sherman. So my grandmother was born in Finland and ended up immigrating to Worcester, Massachusetts, which is where I grew up. But I can remember her, when my older brother, who lives in Magnolia, got married in Worcester, he married an Irish Catholic woman, and I remember at his wedding, and I was about 12 years old at the time, my grandmother, was seated in the second pew, and she was the one who came from Finland, and she didn't have a very high view of Catholicism. And I can remember I still remember this, her sitting there while the Catholic service was going on, and she was muttering. And she would say, "Alimony, alimony." And my mother had to keep turning to her and saying, "Ma, shh." But her views were quite strong again, because I remember when she referred to Lutherans, she would say, Lutheranism is not really religion, it's just a club. So her view, I believe that when she eventually gravitated towards, when she came here, was the Assembly of God Church. And that's something that I know nothing about. She died when she probably died 2 years after that wedding, my brother's wedding,
Well, in a way, Robert, this is a wonderful way to close our session, because the initial intent, and we did touch on it, was be the church's social agent, drawing people together. And your grandmother said that the church was just a club. And so there we have it. Any final words?
Yeah, if you are about to end it. In the spirit of, I think all of our events we're realizing are so multicultural, and we're trying to bring stories and experiences into the history. So I asked Fred if it would be okay to play some music. Church music, obviously. He's
the boss, not me.
No. I'm saying this to Fred because I heard him say in a service that "Be Still My Soul" was incredibly powerful for him, meant so much, and was everything. And so I want to play. It's a version of it that I played at my mother's memorial service 4 years ago, so it doesn't sound like a church choir. But I wanted to, as sort of multicultural experience here, is that we all know that this was the Finlandian music that Sibelius wrote. There are some versions sung around freedom, but probably best known for all congregations is "Be Still My Soul." And I think that it's a bit of then the church experience, if you will let me play this. Oh, maybe I can't.
Never worked when you want to.
Yeah, right. I guess, let's see. Let me try one more time. Maybe I'm not connected. Oh, too bad.
Okay.
What are you saying? Because I didn't.
Maybe at the end we can get you connected to the Wi-Fi here at the LCC.
Sorry about that.
Yeah.
Oh, wait.
Yeah.
Oh, I was going to say, Rob, could I just say that I got married at St. Paul's Church, a Lutheran church, because my mother was a Lutheran and my father was a Catholic. So growing up, I loved the Lutheran church, the hymns, and the Catholic church, it was all in Latin. And if you even fidgeted, the nuns would come along and yank your ear.
Right.
Oh, it was scary. But in order for me to go to my mother's church, my father said, first I had to go to mass.
Oh, really?
So I don't know any kid who would agree to go to church twice on a Sunday. So I very, very rarely went, unfortunately.
Yeah, yeah, I wanted to ask that question. How many of you here were raised Catholic but have some finished background?
What is your question? The Catholic definition?
Yeah, you were raised Catholic, but you had some fin in you, but families being what they are and
And the nuns never stopped asking me if my mother's ready to convert.
right.
And I would say, I'm talking to her.
I did, okay. Is there anyone else?
Hey,
Yes.
Rob, they were in the choir. Maybe they could sing a little song.
Oh, yeah, let me sing something.
Ready to do that?
Let's stand together, let's stand together. Be still my soul, the Lord is on thy side. Bear patiently the cross of grief or pain. Leave to thy God to order and provide. Through thorny ways leads to a joyful
All right, Edward.
I wish they were clear today.
Lovely, isn't it?
And
Couldn't turn it on, right? You can't turn it off.
And listening to that song brings back memories of the 2019 tribute to the charter members of the American Legion Band. 32 and 2/3 of them were Finns. And so after it was all over, we had that rain just before it started, but after it was all over, I think it may have you, Andrea, was wondering where Finlandia was. And so from that point on, we will always have the Finlandia chorus when we have a gathering for that purpose. Why don't we take a little break, and my goal is to have us leave by 5 o'clock. We just have to. A 2-hour meeting is enough. So take a little break.
We had Sibelius' great, I don't know how many greats, but great granddaughter here at that church.
That's right.
Playing it on the piano.
That's right.
Yeah, you know, you
Yeah.